I'm not harming myself, so it's okay to have all these things, I guess. It's not hoarding, it's not compulsive. Collecting, it's just a human thing. Very exciting package that just
You guys, have you seen these yet?
On stationery haul.
Let's do a stationery haul together.
These are my ladies. This is Jill.
So I went to the thrift store the other day and literally hauled out on junk journal supplies. They had so many things.
There are two ways to participate in the creative journaling community, and that's as an artist and a collector of materials. For us, that typically looks like collecting paper, ephemera, stamps, and so forth. This, of course, is not unique to creative journaling. Every hobby has its standard set of tools and required materials, and as you go deeper into a hobby, your collection grows larger, more niche and specific. I believe this is where I am right now in my creative journaling supplies collection, and I believe it has gotten, just a little out of hand. I'm Bree from 1134 Press, and I am in the process of downsizing my craft materials because I plan to move to a smaller spot in my house. As I started opening up every drawer, bag, and box in this little room, going through everything piece by piece to decide if it should stay, if it should go, or if it should be donated. Panic seriously started kicking up, and I thought, oh my God, I either need to invest in a better organization system, or I might need to go talk to the lady, or a combination of both, because this is looking like a problem. I own these bags of scraps, and I have every intention on keeping it forever, whether it be in some kind of organizational system or within my art. So in typical productive procrastination fashion, I decided to pause on my downsizing project to reach out to the doctors in our creative journaling community and asked if they wanted to chat with me about the psychology of collecting. And Dr. Laura Wood said,
this question about collecting becomes really complicated because you could have 10 different answers, and depending on the type of school of thought, the paradigm that you're trained in, you would answer it really differently.
In my conversation with Dr. Laura, she breaks down the many different reasons that could drive a person to collect in the first place and the effect it can have on our lives. I had no idea what to expect from this conversation, but once having it, it made me feel more connected to my collections and inspired to think about my approaches to how to recurate all of my materials. So, why do I feel like this is an important video to make? Well, for one, I wanted a doctor to tell me that I was okay. And secondly, I wanted to have a different kind of conversation about our relationship to materials that went beyond the typical organizational hacks and tips and tricks on how to use up your scraps. I hope that if I do my job right, that you'll leave this video with new ideas to consider when you're shopping, organizing, and creating that make you feel excited and feel good about your collections. So let's get into it.
We misuse psychological words all the time, or words in psychiatry all the time. So what's the difference between collecting, hoarding, and an addiction?
Yeah, no, that's so great because all three of them could be related to this, but totally different. So I think one of the main things that we're looking at is, does the action create distress or harm in somebody's life as a component that we're looking at in terms of addiction, hoarding versus just general collecting. And that could be harm to oneself or harm to others, or distress to oneself and potentially distress to others as well. The other thing that is really tricky about the topic is that people forget this all of the time, but when we look at the field of psychology, or people even confuse psychiatry and psychology. So psychiatry is the medical degree that can prescribe medication and is going to use the DSM, which is sort of our Bible of diagnoses, and is going to work from a medical model. But then we have shared areas with psychiatry and psychology, but even within the world of psychology, there's many different professions. And in each of those professions, there's many different theoretical orientations. So I was having a really fun time thinking about like the different paradigms that I teach and how each of those paradigms would have a different answer about why people collect. So if we think about the psychodynamic paradigm, of course, Freud comes to mind, but I think the most interesting approach in that paradigm is to look at the work of Carl Jung and his ideas around collecting. So some of the core components of that theory says that individuals have both a persona and a shadow. And Jung appropriated a lot of things from a lot of different cultures, and a lot of the work we've been doing today is about deconstructing some of his appropriation and misappropriation. But he often used the yin yang symbol to say that like each person was made up of a shadow side and a light side, and that it's not that one part is bad or good, but it's about creating that psychological wholeness, and that, you know, the light needs dark and the dark needs light. And so Jung had this idea of the collective unconscious, this space that we all share together in this world of dreams and symbols, and that these symbols can have reoccurring meaning for people across cultures. And so he looked at a lot of artwork and looked at people who had never met one another would create these repeating images. And, you know, I think about your videos too, and so much how we talk about like circles or the use of like repeating elements. Like there are things that people are naturally drawn to, or you see this all of the time in the junk journal world too. Like all of a sudden there'll be thing like wings, like everything has a wing on it, every person has a wing. You know, dragons have, you know, get wings, you know, things that have wings, that things that don't normally have wings, you know, or like why people all of a sudden become really into distressed looks about the work. Like how do these trends happen? And the way that Jung would have described that is about that it lives in this collective unconscious, and each of that represents something throughout time. And so when I think about Carl Jung and how he thinks about collecting, he would say a couple of things. One, that people collecting is a way for them to claim like unclaimed aspects of themselves. So I was thinking about, and I'll give this example as we move throughout, when I was in seventh grade, my mom was a really big collector of different tchotchkes and items. And I remember we were at this like Saturday flea market, and I had found this like tiny teapot that looked like a cat. And I remember deciding, I was like, okay, this is my thing. I'm collecting teapots. And like I bought two teapots that day because I was like, 2 teapots is a collection. And and like from seventh grade all the way through, you know, even today, like I still have like a curated teapot collection. And so, you know, if I would analyze that through a Jungian lens, the teapot represents this sort of, there's many interpretations for things, but a teapot historically has represented this idea of like a call to dive deeper into one's thoughts or feelings. It's a contained space. It's a metaphor for transformation because you put the leaves in and put the hot water, and this transformational process happens of 2 things that then become something new to be able to drink. There's a medicinal quality to tea throughout history. Tea has represented harmony and tranquility and containment in different cultures. And so if I were treating myself in therapy and I was working as a Jungian analyst, I might be really interested in exploring somebody who's collecting something, and through that lens of what does that symbol mean in their life, and how is that helping them integrate an unclaimed aspect of themselves. And so I think about, you know, that age of being in 7th grade and a young teenager, and that's such a time of identity formation, and like knowing that teapots represent this thing about like delving deeper into one's thoughts and ideas. Like it was really like maybe a way I was claiming that at the time. So that's like a psychoanalytic example. And so a behavioral paradigm might look at this very differently, this idea of collecting, that is it for somebody, is it a compulsion? How is collecting getting reinforced? Was somebody getting positive feedback about this idea that, or was oneself getting positive feedback, like collecting gave you social relationships? Is it that it gave you community? Is it that it gave you relief from anxiety? So the idea is that the collecting gets reinforced either externally or internally for someone, and that sort of leads to why they continue to collect. And it could even be that it's pleasurable or it's aesthetically really beautiful, but the idea is that it's reinforcing, that it reinforces pleasure centers in our mind. It reinforces what people are telling us about ourselves and how we're feeling about ourselves from a collecting perspective, from a behavioral perspective. The next paradigm is the existential humanistic paradigm, which is really looking at this space of the relational component of things, and as well as like answering those deep existential questions. Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? And I think this is a really interesting paradigm to think about collecting through as well. The existential paradigm really says, like, at its core, we're all going to die. So you can either choose to live a life of like meaning making, freedom, choice, or you can live in existential angst, like denying responsibility, spaces of sort of doom and gloom, not engaging with the world. And that everything, if we're all headed to the same place in the end, and we don't know what that is, like, how do we want to take control of our life and make meaning out of it? And so I feel like if we were looking at collecting from an existential perspective, we could say that it's about the meaning making that the collecting gives you, and that when a person can make meaning out of their collecting, and that provides great fulfillment or joy, whether that's about leaving a legacy behind, whether that's around living in the moment and this is what gives you meaning, whether it's around a story of my relatives collected things, so I collect things. That's another way to look at it. And so, I think about if freedom is such a big part of the existential paradigm, and we go back to the thing about the teapot for me, perhaps it's that my mother was a collector in a way that I claimed my own freedom was like by creating my own first collection out of something. And from the behavioral paradigm, the teapot, maybe it's that it gave me a way to connect with my mother, and that was reinforcing in that relationship. She was a really big part of me collecting teapots and adding to my teapot collection. When we think about other paradigms, the postmodern social constructivist paradigm that says there's multiple truths and realities. I mean, this becomes really interesting because if I was treating somebody through that paradigm in therapy and they were bringing up collecting, I would get really curious asking them about, like, what are the narratives and stories around these objects that you collect, and like, why is that important to you constructing your identity, and how is that allowing you to like claim your truth and your story? And then if we look at like contemporary theories, again, it's like under each of these paradigms, there's so many theories that would have their own ideas, but one contemporary theory that I'm trained in is internal family systems, that says that we're all born with a core self that is calm and compassionate and curious and courageous, and we develop these parts. And so I might look at a part of myself, like I have a collecting part, and the model would ask me to get curious about that collecting part and to really listen internally to like hearing the story of the collecting part, and that it has its own we each have our own unique reasons for collecting. There's, so many other theories too. If we look at it from an evolutionary psychology perspective, people had to collect and hunt and gather as a way of sustaining life. And this could be a leftover behavior from that survival mode of collecting. If we looked at it from a developmental psychology perspective, that certainly could be about identity, and that there's a time in life where we have our own money and we can claim things, we can create a small microcosm of a world within a big world that's out of control. 101 different ways to look at collecting, but
Yeah, it's so interesting because as you were explaining each paradigm, right? I could relate to everyone.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of truth that resonated with me with each one. So it's like,
Yeah. And I think it's like, you know, I think it's about asking ourselves those questions like, is it helping you make meaning out of your life? Is it, and this is where the eclectic kind of paradigm came from, because it's rare that only one theory is right, right? Even when we think about junk journaling, it's like there are many different approaches to the work and many different ways about going about it. And it's the same. And like, it's fun to borrow and take from different places when it's intentional and thoughtful. And so I feel like that's such a great space for you to live in around this question. Like, as you're working with the items and maybe paring down your collection or maybe really choosing to keeping your collection, like, how is it bringing you meaning, and like how is it reinforcing for you, and how is it helping you claim aspects of yourself, and are there using those questions as a way to really like recurate your collection. And I think that also can provide a lot of peace as you're thinking about this massive transition that you're going to be going through, and having that peace around your collecting and having that intentional thought process, I feel like is such a gift for anyone to give themselves.
So let's keep the conversation going. I really would love to learn, what else do you collect that's outside of art supplies, and what paradigm resonated with you and your relationship with your collecting? I hope, Jesus, I hope you found this video to be good food for thought. Not only is Laura an incredible academic and mental health professional, she is also a very, very talented creative journaling artist. So if you want to connect with her on Instagram, I will leave the tag somewhere on the screen, somewhere below in the description. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Laura, for chatting with me. And oh, before I go, quick update. Our first anthology for creative journaling artists, called The Archivist, is planned to be published soon. And it is in its very, very last few rounds of design edits, and I can't wait to share it with you all soon. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.